Hello, nonprofit leaders. I'm Sarah Olivieri, your host, and this podcast is here to assist people like you, executive directors, board members, and other nonprofit leaders make a bigger impact with insights, tips, and lessons learned from nonprofit leaders and experts. Having been an executive director, a board member, and now a consultant and coach, I truly understand the challenges you face. And that's why I'm here. I'm all about working smarter, not harder, so you can make a bigger impact without the burnout. And so is our sponsor, DonorBox. DonorBox isn't just a suite of helpful fundraising tools, it's a partner that helps you raise more money and supports you in retaining your donors. I love their forward-thinking approach. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. And don't forget to sign up for the Inspired Nonprofit Leadership newsletter, where you'll get bite-sized, actionable tips just for nonprofit leaders like you, delivered weekly to your inbox. Sign up at inspirednonprofitleadership.com/sign up. Okay, let's dive into today's episode. My guest for this episode is Lou, and he has a Greek last name, which I'm probably going to butcher. Kotsinis. I'll have him. Did I do it right?
Very well
Kotsinis?
done. Yeah, you're
awesome.
You're an official Greek. Very good.
Lou Kotsinis, who is the founder of a digital marketing agency focused exclusively on nonprofit and educational communities called BCS Interactive. And he founded it back in 2011, which I love because it means he has seen trends go by and things that are going to stick around for a long time. He leads a team of technologists, designers, and strategists that have helped organizations such as the World Childhood Foundation, the Seeing Eye, and the New Jersey Conservation Foundation craft authentic stories, showcase their impact, and grow their causes. Lou has a great background. He graduated from Rutgers University, and he is interested in hiking, reading, yoga, and is a jazz musician. I'll stop there. Lou, welcome to the podcast. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you came to here as a whole person.
Hey, Sarah, thank you for having me. Well, I think that bio touched on something that's kind of important to me outside of the business. And it reminds me of an old saying, what do you call a guy who hangs out with musicians? Have you heard that one? Yeah, well, the guy who hangs out with musicians is a drummer. So I've had to deal with that my entire life. I've been playing since I was 8 years old. I'm now 52, so that's a really long time. But that instrument in particular is in my DNA. And about 3 years ago, I got together with a couple of colleagues and we started a local jazz trio. So that's how I spend a lot of my time outside of BCS Interactive and thinking about nonprofits. And, we've been lucky enough to score some gigs playing festivals and private parties and things like that. So I actually get paid to do this. Not a lot, playing jazz drums is not a lucrative career. I don't recommend it unless you're really, top echelon. But it's a wonderful thing to have in addition to running an agency, which can be quite stressful from time to time. So that's a big part of what, aside from family and work, a big part of what I do.
I love it. Well, I'm going to go ahead and ask you then straight out, what do you feel are the connections between drums and jazz and marketing?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I think preparation has a lot to do with it. Like, in order to put on a good performance, you really need to be prepared. You need to have practiced. I think, a lot of what we'll talk about today comes back to the fundamentals of marketing, which are consistency and momentum. And these are things that, are required to be any type of musician. And the one thing that goes hand in hand with playing jazz is improvisation. I don't know how much you want to improvise as far as your marketing is concerned. I mean, you do want to put some thought into it, but as a jazz musician, it's very loose and unstructured. So while you're trying to keep consistent time, you also need to throw some interesting, phrases and things into the mix. So, I guess that could be applied to marketing, especially when it comes to, say, social media. You want to be nimble, but I do believe in structure and consistency.
Yeah. Well, I obviously am not the jazz specialist that you are, although I do love jazz. And from what I've heard from other musicians and artists, to be great at improvising, you have to really know your fundamentals.
100%.
That's what I've heard.
100%.
And better you know your fundamentals, the more you can play and have it work out and sound good
That's what you
as
want.
opposed to sounding terrible.
Yeah, that's what you want.
All right. Well, I love talking about marketing, so let's dive in. My first question is about why it's essential for nonprofit leaders when they're thinking about digital marketing to take a strategic mindset rather than a tactical one. And before I have you answer that question, I'm going to have you answer, how do you define the difference between strategy and tactics?
Sure. Well, this might not be a textbook definition, but for me, tactics are the actual things that you are doing, right? I've built a website, I'm putting out a social post, I'm delivering email. These are the kind of how-tos. The strategy is pulling back and saying, what goals are we trying to achieve? And what is the overarching theme that we are using around that? So the strategic mindset is absolutely critical. So in marketing success. So don't get me wrong. I mean, tactics are important. But that really ends up being the easy part, right? Like you can outsource that to us, or you can keep it in-house in terms of putting together a website or whatever the tactics may be. But the challenge is in our industry that you know, nonprofit industries, is that given capacity and budget issues, many nonprofits simply don't elevate marketing to make it the priority that it should be. And if you're not leading with what I call that marketing mindset, the idea that marketing is critical to overall success, then going back to what we spoke about earlier, you're not going to build that momentum and that consistency, which are the two factors that are so important in driving the outcomes that you want. So in addition to all of the other hats that an executive director wears, and you know this, you know, personally, there's a lot involved there. I do think that marketing mindset is critical. You know, it's, again, the how can be done by us. It's kind of the why that the executive director needs to be able to embrace and really believe that what they're doing is going to grow their cause or whatever their, you know, specific goal is.
Yeah, so true. So many good points in there. And I'll just add, like, I have seen when folks, because especially because of digital, there are so many tactics out there. If you don't take a strategic approach, that is how you waste tons of money.
Sure.
You know, a marketing
Correct.
can have a great return on investment, but it can also really tank you if you're not taking a strategic approach, because there you'll just be like lost in an infinite universe of things to try.
Correct. And having a strategy is critically important. But even prior to that, when I say strategic mindset or marketing mindset, it's the inner belief that what we are about to do is money well spent. And it's usually not the executive director that has the challenge. I think they see it for the most part. It really goes back to the board, right? And the board, as you know, their job is to be stewards of the organization. So I understand them being critical of each expenditure. But, you know, this idea that, you know, we're only able to spend on programs, I think that's kind of a self-limiting kind of philosophy. So when I say marketing mindset, it's more about the belief that this is necessary, that it will work, then the strategy, then the tactics.
Yeah, 100%. I'll just chime in here too with, you know, because I used to do marketing for nonprofits, and I really looked a lot at this issue of why don't nonprofits take marketing seriously or do it in the comprehensive way that for-profits do. And kind of what I came to looking from a historical lens is that nonprofits didn't have marketing, right? When I started doing marketing for nonprofits like back in 2005, 6, and nobody in the nonprofit space used this word marketing. Everybody only did communications or communications and public relations, you know, which is kind of in their communications. And when I think of marketing has communications, but it also has research and it has experiments, and what ended up evolving in the for-profit space, the term growth marketing, right, which means your marketing research and experiments are now informing your services as well. And because I think nonprofits were just thinking communications and not thinking marketing, they kind of missed this huge evolution of the marketing world. Sure. And missed out on a lot of things. Do you feel like that's kind of what you see in the nonprofit space now, or is it different?
A little bit, but you know, digital has kind of changed that a little bit. I think what I go back to is this kind of reliance on luck and word of mouth, right? I think you and I are, or at least I can speak for myself, old enough to remember the ALS, the Ice Bucket Challenge. Yeah. So every nonprofit at that point, and even now, looks at that and says, "Oh, that's what we're going to do. We're going to have a viral moment." And those are really few and far between, right? And in our experience, it's the organizations that, again, going back to consistency, going back to regular marketing and fundamentals, that are the ones that end up achieving success and are building the infrastructure for a strong organization to grow over the long term. So, to your point, communications, PR, all of that is marketing. So I don't think it's a misunderstanding of what the terms are. Again, it just goes back to, you just made the point yourself, is that I really do encourage our clients, and the best ones we work with, view their organizations as a business, right? The nonprofit is their tax status, but they realize that these are investments in critical infrastructure. And they realize that if they want to achieve the goals that they've laid out for themselves, they have to do the things, or at least get in the mindset of doing the things that for-profits are doing.
Yeah, 100%. So I want to ask you about from your perspective, you've been doing this a long time, what goes into a great strategy? And because I like to ask 2 questions at once so you can have your choice.
Right.
Do you differentiate between marketing strategies that help bring in donors versus marketing strategies that might have other purposes?
Well, so the answer to all of that, really, not to be evasive, is it depends, right? There's a lot to any marketing strategy, and it depends on the organization and its niche and factors and that type of thing. But, I always like to start from theoretical level, right? So for any strategy to work, there's really 4 fundamental steps. And an organization might be in different stages within these steps. It really, it starts from a foundational level. All marketing and branding, for that matter, really starts with story, right? It starts with developing and refining a story that resonates with your audience. And you can use story interchangeably with concepts like mission, positioning, branding. I see them all as one thing, but it's that story that's going to drive everything that you're doing. So, it's a matter of asking, who is our audience? What promises are we making to them? How is that message being received? If you can develop that kind of cornerstone component, everything else is going to fall into place. You can tweak your strategy from there and what have you, and build your tactics. If it's inconsistent or unclear, or you have it wrong, then everything else is going to suffer. So we start from the beginning with this fundamental of story. The next process is to think about, well, how are we going to convey that story? And that really comes down to the website, right? To this day, the website is the nonprofit's most important storytelling tool. Irrespective of what happens out there in digital tactics, they are going to find you, right? With the story the idea I like to share is that, if you want to buy a digital device, or you're buying a car, or you're looking for a restaurant, you're not really too concerned about the story behind the brand, right? You want to just find the best price or the most convenient service or what have you. It's transactional, right? Not to knock those things, but with a nonprofit, if you're going to give money, you want to be committed to that cause. You want to know about that story. So this is actually an asset that a nonprofit can bring to the table. So it's a matter of having a great website that conveys that story. So you've got your fundamental foundation of story. You're conveying it through the website. Then it's time to look at things like social media, where we're spending most of our time these days. And there it's all about building community, right? It's all about developing and cultivating an audience that is interested in the impact that you're making. I think way too many nonprofits make the mistake of simply going out and posting once a week about an event they have coming up or an award they've received. And in the end, that becomes a little self-serving, right? You have to think about how many constituents are out there and how many different places could they be going to get information. So you really want to build a community. And then lastly, you think about one-to-one communication, which I see as email. And that value concept is there as well too. Are we creating the messaging and the content that this individual wants to learn about? So I probably didn't answer your question directly in terms of how to cultivate a strategy, but the idea is if you have these fundamentals in place, then it's a matter of really thinking through your audience and your specific goal. And then you'll know within your channels, well, who is the audience we want? Where are they spending time? And start to develop messaging around that. And it's an iterative process. A lot of people don't like to hear that. You might not get it right the first time, but you're looking at data. You're trying to get feedback from what's happening out there, and you adjust accordingly.
Yeah, I whether or not people want to hear that, you should hear that. It's an iterative process. It has to be. I think anybody who wants to sell you one and done marketing, or is just like, I'm just going to build you a website and that's going to be it, doesn't really understand how these things work, because you can only make so many educated guesses. And to me, what's exciting about our kind of modern marketing platforms, digital stuff, is we can get data fast and then we can refine. And there is no better data than actually doing it and seeing how people respond. That is way more accurate than like just asking them what they want, which is a decent starting place. But iterate, so important.
That's correct.
And I think you shared some, really important fundamentals. I've seen a lot of nonprofits, like they're going after more advanced social media things. And usually people have a website, but it's often not great. And I see so many nonprofits missing the email basics, right? There's either no opt-in or people opt in and there's no welcome. Like the best they have often is if you make a donation, you might get a generic receipt for your donation. It's pretty amazing how many people skip those fundamental things. So I think that was a very helpful answer.
Sure. And and all of that goes back to strategy again, not to sound like a broken record, but if you believe in the concepts, if you believe that this can work for you, then you're going to do the very things that you're talking about, Sarah, which is, as an example, we have clients that will come to us and say, if I build a website with you, how long before I have to redesign it, right? And what's implicit in that question is, well, I'm just going to put that website up and never look at it again. And the truth is, you should be in it, once a month, well, at least, twice a month, once every week, looking at who's coming to the site through analytics, making sure your copy is resonating, and you should be doing that on all your different channels. That's what brings results, and that's what brings kind of ROI in terms of the investment that you're making.
Yeah, really important. So speaking of ROI and having great content and seeing how it's resonating, of course, everyone's thinking about how to use AI. Hopefully they're thinking about how to use it well. Right. So let me ask you, what are your thoughts? Purposes. Yeah, what are your thoughts about using AI in marketing? How do you use it well?
Well, there's a couple of ways, and by the way, we're just starting to explore this as well. So, I mean, this is kind of new for everybody, but we're really embracing it and learning along the way. There's two aspects to it. First, there's this idea that everybody I think is aware of, which is how AI can help improve efficiency and processes and quickly design websites and all that kind of stuff. And that's definitely worth looking into. I rely on AI a lot in my business to help me improve my writing and come up with email subject headings and all these kinds of things. So I won't kind of address that there because that's a huge topic. What I think nonprofits need to be looking at now as an opportunity is the fact that AI search is here and it's incredible. So classically, if we needed anything as a society, we just go Google it, right? But now you have platforms like ChatGPT and Perplexity and my favorite, which is Claude. I don't know if you've used this one, but it's excellent. Yeah. And in short, you search on these platforms and they'll return an incredible summary of what you were looking for. And then they'll prompt you to have a discussion with them to explore further. I tell people, like Claude in particular, it's like speaking to the smartest college professor you've ever met, who is polite and answers quickly and doesn't mind you talking to them all day long. So it's just a great experience. So, right now, only about 6 to 8% of search goes to these platforms, and Google, of course, dominates, has the rest, but I definitely see that changing. So I think smart, forward-thinking nonprofits should be positioning themselves to be found there. But right now in its early stages, it's trickier than Google. Like we kind of know what we have to do to eventually, hopefully be found in Google, because AI platforms don't just rely on the web. They're trained on what's called data sets, which you kind of may be familiar with. But so we're still learning about this, but our guidance and work with nonprofits is that they should be building their brands across multiple channels. Have a great presence on, let's say, Facebook. Have a great presence, Reddit. Make sure your website is up to par. Produce as much content as you can in terms of white papers that you're putting out on the web or video or what have you, because it's drawing from all of these different kind of areas. So, I'm very excited by it. Obviously, there's room to be very scared of it, but I just see it overall as a positive. I mean, I might be naive on that front, but that's what we're advising clients.
Yeah, I love that. And I don't know that you're naive. I think whenever a new technology comes along, an emotional response is not as helpful as a practical, how am I going to use this tool? And like any tool, some people will use it for destruction. Some people will use it for construction. And the choice is up to you. We don't, how I feel about a hammer doesn't really matter as much as how I use the hammer. And so I think it's fine, like, be scared of AI, don't scared of AI, don't be scared of AI, whatever, it doesn't matter. Use it as a tool and use it for good.
And use it for good, of course. And I will tell you, like, this one is truly transformational. So, earlier you mentioned I'd been around a while to see the trends, and I have. Like, I was here when the web was really the way to go. I saw when, social media started to almost kind of take over the web. I saw, when apps were coming around. But those were changes that happened at a slow enough pace that a nonprofit or a brand could adapt to them over time. They weren't really destroying anything. They were complementary. AI is something that is on a whole other level entirely, right? And again, this is not to be ominous. It's just that it is so powerful and so good that it is going to transform our society. It's already started doing that. So I encourage people to learn about it and practice with it. Those 3 platforms that I mentioned before, try them out, understand how they work, and understand where they can go.
Yeah. What I love about AI platforms is they are easier to learn than almost any platform before, because they do most of the work. For you can be sloppy, right? And they do the work. And to really encourage people, like, based on what you said, I totally agree. Like, AI is this new technology that's making everything move so much faster, such to the point that if you're not using AI, you will not be able to keep up. Like, you need to use it just to be able to keep up with the rounds and rounds of changes that are going to come, because the AI is going to be keeping up. We're going to need that speed. Yeah, I love it. So let's shift gears a little and talk about how nonprofit leaders communicate. Let's talk about that storytelling. Let's talk about what makes storytelling like high return on investment versus other activities that maybe folks can down prioritize a little. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the key thing to realize here, I always get in trouble when I say this, but I think a lot of nonprofits suffer from a little bit of a, for lack of a better term, kind of a self-esteem issue. And they think, well, I'm a nonprofit. I have to go up against these for-profits, and I have to go against, competition. And, we're just perhaps this small organization. But what they don't realize is they have a secret weapon when it comes to marketing, and that is their story. By definition, every nonprofit is trying to change the world. So they have inherently this beautiful human story. And that is so powerful because it's engaging and it shows impact. And people want to immerse themselves in it if you're meeting the right audience, right? So that right there is just the inherent power that a nonprofit has. And that's why I encourage people to start from there. Before you're worried about your website or your social media, understand who your audience is, and then look inward and find all the wonderful things that you're doing and bring those out. That's why, we used to be a full service, quote unquote, agency where we work with both for-profits and nonprofits. And soon into that, I started to realize that the nonprofits were really our favorite clients to work with because they had these stories. You had CPA firms and law firms, and no knock to them. I mean, you can make a lot of money working with them, but it's really hard to come up with a great human story about a law firm. You know what I mean? I guess you can do it, right? But we're working with special needs organizations and democracy organizations and environmental causes, and it's just, you feel like you're helping society. And you are. So that's, kind of my baseline understanding of story and how executive directors in particular should focus on that and then grow from there.
Yeah, so true. When I think of story, and I agree with you 100%. I like to think of like Coca-Cola, who as a brand is amazing at telling stories. They value telling stories. They have to make up stories to sell sugar water, caffeinated sugar water, right?
That's 100%.
You as a nonprofit have a huge edge on Coca-Cola because you have actually amazing stories that they would die to have.
That's right.
So like if they can make up a story to sell sugar water, caffeinated sugar water.
Lots of it.
You can use your real stories, and you do not have to be just like saving puppies, who save children with autism to have a great story. I can't think of a nonprofit who isn't filled with great stories.
Right.
Do you have any favorite nonprofit stories you'd like to share with us?
Oh boy. Well, you know what? I'll just go to one of our own clients. Just you mentioned earlier, like I love to hike. I love to be outdoors. And I don't know how it is in where you are in New York, but around here in New Jersey, land is now becoming, it's a premium, right? And you'll just drive around and see these once beautiful forests and small wooded areas. And a year later, they're knocked down and there's, some building there. And I'm a capitalist like everybody else in this industry. I love it. But at some point that's not sustainable anymore, right? So we partnered with the New Jersey Conservation Foundation, and what they do by definition is they raise funds and then they go out and they purchase these lands and they keep them, safe and kind of unmolested. So the storytelling we did there was all about being outdoors and all about hiking and all about, what's going to happen if we end up losing this and how precious it is. And I found that really engaging. And the power of story is that it's not just inherently what you have, but there is an audience out there waiting for you. No matter what nonprofit you are, someone has been affected by the problem that you are trying to solve. And when you combine those two elements, it's really very powerful. Also the special needs organizations that we work with, that's an incredible story as well too, or series of stories where, families have been impacted by this kind of, let's just be honest, devastating thing for the most part. And the ability to unlock the humanity of what some of these organizations do. The one I'm thinking of right now is Pillar Care Continuum, which provides special needs housing, and we've done work with them as well too. There's just, again, like for lack of a better term, an inner beauty to that, which you can't help but be moved when you arrive at that website and want to take action.
Yeah, absolutely. We're so moved by stories. I love that. And, I think if you could almost sum up like the experience of bringing in donors, it's tell them a story that they then want to be a part of, and then give them the opportunity to be a part of the next chapter.
That's wonderful.
And that's like it, Yeah. I love it. Well, we're getting close on time. What are your kind of final words of wisdom you would share out there with nonprofit leaders who are listening and thinking, okay, maybe I do need to rethink strategically how I'm thinking about marketing and the role it plays? What words of advice would you give them to kind of prioritize and put that into perspective?
Yeah, again, I think it's a little bit of inner reflection, right? To say to yourself, all right, so I understand in theory that marketing works. I have to truly now believe it, that this is a critical investment and that we move forward on that. And just very briefly, I want to back up that again, usually it's not the executive director of the nonprofit leadership. They have to sell their case to the board. And I think what I would want to leave into, I actually wrote a blog post on doing this because we work with a lot of executive directors that are confronted with that. At the end of the day, if you're finding resistance at the board level, put it into the most practical terms that you can. You don't approach kind of resistant board members with too much data and too much kind of like highfalutin marketing terminology, because they're going to, get pushed further away. But, put it in practical terms. We've got this goal to achieve. You want me to raise this many, funds. We've got this capital campaign or whatever. We can't do that if our story isn't there, right? We can't do it if we don't have an audience online. We don't have it. We can't do this if, nobody knows who we are. And if you put it in those terms, even the kind of most stubborn individual is going to kind of get that. So it's a matter of adapting that marketing mindset and also being able to convey the emphasis of that to the board. And the only other thing I would add is just to what you and I have been talking about the inherent power of your story. Know that you have that. Know that it can fuel a lot of your success if you tap into it and kind of organize it properly.
Yeah, I love that. I can't help for our audience who are struggling with that board challenge. Normally, this isn't my time for self-promotion, but that's why I created a board training that's part of a board clarity club that I offer for boards that teaches boards not to be a part of any of those decisions. So if that is your problem out there, feel free to reach out. I'll give you the link to it. And then once your board is no longer involved in making any decisions like that, you can go over to Lou's company and get the marketing that you already know makes sense for you.
Well, I love that approach. I've heard several executive directors do that. I just think it's a courageous step. So I'd be willing to learn more about that.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, tell us, those folks who are thinking, yes, I do want more. Who should be reaching out to you, and what's the best way to do that?
Well, really, irrespective of size, we'll speak to any nonprofit leader that already has that marketing mindset and wants to move forward. So, and overall, we'll speak to anyone. We want the nonprofit community to succeed. But if you're interested in growing and moving forward based on what we spoke about, then, happy to talk to you. Yeah. So, I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit. You can find me there. And if you enjoyed what we spoke about today and you find it relevant, I would encourage you to sign up for our blog, which is bcsinteractive.com/sign-up. But I hope you'll have that link in the notes, Sarah.
We will.
Awesome.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Lou, for sharing your insights. And thank you out there for tuning in and for everything you do to make our communities better. Before you go, I have a quick small favor. Would you take a moment to share this podcast with a friend or colleague who could benefit from these conversations? And remember, nonprofits are more complex than those for-profit businesses. So the trick is to work smarter, not harder. Until next time, be well and all the best.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.